Okay. Hello and welcome to another episode of Vision Chat. Today, Stina and I are speaking with Jill McClennen. Am I pronouncing your name correctly?
You are, yeah.
Good. I should have asked that beforehand. Sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
Jill is a certified death doula and end-of-life coach, a non-medical professional especially trained to provide holistic care for individuals in their final stages of life. She offers comprehensive support, preparation, and deep soul healing to her clients and their families, whether in person or through virtual sessions. In addition to her role as a death doula, Jill is a trauma-sensitive yoga instructor. She also incorporates reiki and shamanic healing techniques to help clients address their fears surrounding death, cope with the dying process, and navigate their grief. Jill is also the host of the Seeing Death Clearly podcast, available on all major podcast platforms. Through her podcast, she talks with guests as they share valuable insights and stories related to end-of-life matters, further extending her mission to promote understanding and compassion about this important stage of life. Jill, welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I obviously love to talk about death and dying and grief, so I appreciate you giving me an opportunity to talk to you about it.
Wonderful. Well, death is one of those things, right, that seems kind of taboo and maybe even morbid to some people. And it's interesting how birth and midwives and birthing doulas, it's a different vibe. And it's almost like, oh, yay, we get to talk about birth. But when it comes to death, the tone changes a little bit. But it is an important stage of life. It's going to happen for everyone.
Yes. Yeah, we can't avoid it. We're all going to have to face it with loved ones, as well as we're all going to die, right? Eventually, that's something we can't escape.
Right. So, Jill, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit more, and just kind of how you got started in this field?
Of course, yeah. So I am a career changer. I'm 45 now. I got into this career about 5 years ago. I did that kind of getting ready to turn 40, thinking, well, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? I used to work in kitchens. I actually still work in kitchens part-time. Professional kitchens are a lot of work on your body physically, in mentally and emotionally as well. And so I just didn't want to do this forever. And so when I backtrack slightly, my husband and we got married when we lived in California. We were both working in restaurants, and actually I was in a restaurant at that point. He was in a hotel. We decided we wanted to open a bakery together. And so my grandmother was getting ready to turn 90, and she said, why don't you move home to New Jersey, literally all the way across the country to New Jersey, and you can open a bakery here and you can live with me. It'll keep me in my house, and then you don't have to pay rent. So while you're building your business, it can save you some money. So we were like, all right, sure, why not? Let's go to New Jersey. And not too long after we moved in, my grandmother found out she had cancer. And so we spent the last 4 years of her life living with her, helping her with her treatments and all of her daily needs, as things progressed, as she aged, as well as the disease progressed, she needed more and more care. And so at the end of that experience, I was so grateful for hospice and everything that they did. And it just was such a beautiful experience working with them and being able to understand more about the realities of what was happening, because it didn't look like it did on TV or in movies. It's like we see it in TV and movies, and either it's like super like, adventurous and, things are blowing up and like it's all crazy, or they just like peacefully close their eyes and go to sleep. And like it doesn't really work that way in reality for most of us. And so I asked so many questions of these hospice nurses when they would come in. And by the time that the experience was done, I was so grateful that I was able to be there with her, even though it was sad. I mean, it was my grandma, she raised me. So I was able to give back to her at the end of her life, caring for her in the same way that really she cared for me when I was little, but on the other end of the spectrum. And so I had even said then, I think maybe I want to be a hospice nurse. And my husband was like, all right, honey, whatever you want to do. But we had a bakery. I had a 6-month-old baby. It was kind of not the right time to go back to school to become a nurse because I didn't have any nursing background. So I would have had to have started from the beginning. And life happens. And so we ended up closing our bakery. We had a second child. We moved, like how life goes. And 2019, I believe it was, I heard of a death doula. And when I heard it, I was like, oh, that's the thing. Because at that point, I was already starting to question what did I want to do long term? I couldn't be in a kitchen until I was 65. Like, there was no way 25 more years working in a kitchen was going to happen. And so, as soon as I heard it, I was like, that's it. That's it right there. And I was scared because, there's all the, especially imposter syndrome, coming from outside of healthcare altogether. I thought, who's going to want to hire a cook to come in and take care of their loved one at the end of life? But eventually I got over some of that and faced my fears and started my training in January of 2020. I started my training thinking it was going to take me many years. I had 2 kids at that point. I had 2 jobs at that point. I thought, I'm just going to do it part-time until I can, get all my training done. And then I had a lot of time on my hands. So by July of 2020, I was done my training. I ended up with like my website, my whole business was set up, and now here I am. And it's been an interesting journey for sure.
Yeah, sounds like quite a journey.
It really
To
was.
yeah. To people that doesn't know what a death doula is, do you want to explain it quickly?
Yeah, so a death doula is similar to hospice in some ways. So if anybody's ever worked with a hospice provider for a loved one, it's got a lot of overlaps with what hospice does, but I think the biggest difference is that we don't provide any medical care at all. So we're not nurses, even though some people that are nurses do train to become death doulas. The care that we give people at the end of life, or even, I mean, that's one of the big things that I try to get people to work with me a little bit earlier, right? Like, we should be working with death doulas before we're facing the end of life so that we're better prepared for the end of life. That's why I actually started calling myself an end of life coach, because I feel like people understood life coach. And as I was explaining what I did, they said, oh, you almost sound like you're a life coach. And I was like, well, I guess I kind of am, but I'm just specializing in end of life, the fears, the anxieties, the preparation for it, the working on getting closure before we reach the end of life, because so many people I talk to that are dying, the biggest thing is they're wanting closure with a person around a certain circumstance or situation, and they can't get it at that point, for a variety of reasons. And even if they can get it, it's better if we do these things earlier. So I do usually now kind of say, even though some people know what a doula is, there's still a lot of people that they're like, I don't even know what a doula is. So like, we really, it's like they have no understanding at all, where a lot of people understand life coaches. So it really is similar to the work that a life coach does. And we can work with people at all stages of life. Not all death doulas will do that. But I am one of the ones that I want to help people get prepared for death at any stage of life, because we never know when it's going to happen to us. And I know that's the part that then people get a little scared and they get a little freaked out and they're like, oh, I don't want to think about that. Well, I know none of us really want to think about it, but not thinking about it isn't going to keep us safe. It's not going to prevent me from having an accident tomorrow that I need to think about it. All it's going to do is leave me at a place where I've never thought about it. I've never talked about it with my husband. I've never talked about it with my parents or my children. So if something does happen, then it is really traumatic, versus if we're prepared for it, it's still sad. When people we love die, it's still sad, but it's not going to be as traumatic of a situation as it is sometimes for people when they're just not prepared, because not being prepared is the worst way to go into end of life.
I'm really curious about something. Do you feel like spirituality or beliefs in something else or higher power? Do any of these things play a part or a role in the work that you do?
Very much so. And my personal spiritual beliefs, my personal beliefs about what comes after death really doesn't have anything to do with the work that I do with people. You know, I try to keep that kind of to myself. Honestly, though, I'm a Libra, so like I'm kind of one of those people where I'm like, I try to find balance with everything. And I'm also kind of like, I don't really know. Like I'm not set on one thing. I don't know what happens after we die. But when I talk to people that are dying, you know, a lot of times their spiritual beliefs from their childhood kind of pop up. So even people that maybe have left behind their religion of childhood for many years, they kind of circle back to it sometimes at the end of life. And that I've found very interesting. Um, I've had conversations with people that they'll say, you know, like, I haven't believed anything in a really long time, but now that I'm nearing the end of life, like, I feel like I need to believe something. Some people are still okay with saying, I don't think anything happens when we die. I think we go out like a light bulb, and they're fine with that. But then other people, they really want to believe that life goes on after this, or that we, you know, meet up with our loved ones afterwards. My job is to just give them the space to process whatever they're thinking about and whatever they're feeling without trying to influence their beliefs. And I have heard, unfortunately, stories of people being on hospice where either a chaplain comes in. One person I had heard, and I laugh about it, but it's really not funny. The janitor at the hospital was going into people's rooms that were dying and bringing in a Bible and trying to like basically convert them to Christianity before they died on their deathbed. Like, that's not any of our business, right? Like, what they believe should not. I would be really upset. My husband's atheist. He's always been atheist. He was raised with no religion at all. If I found out that somebody was in his hospital room when he was dying and they were trying to convert him to a different religion at the end of life, I would be very upset about that, because that's not on anybody to do that. That's not your place, and that's not my place. But spirituality is so present at the end of life that it always almost comes up. It's just really my place to kind of sit and hold the space for them and allow them to talk it through. And sometimes they'll ask me what I believe, and I really do try to not say anything because I don't want to influence them. So I'll just ask them back, but like, well, what do you believe? You know, like, what do you think? And then I will say, I'm open to all possibilities. Honestly, I don't think anything's going to surprise me when I die. And of course, if I die and nothing happens, I won't know the difference. If I die and get reincarnated, okay, cool. If I die and I go to a heaven or some other place, okay, sure. I don't know. It all seems as possible to me, any of the possibilities. But that's why I love to think about it and talk about it, because it's interesting.
That's wonderful. Do you want to share a story, like from one of the spiritual experience you had?
Yeah, let me think of a good one. Uh, there was somebody, actually a close friend of mine that she supported a friend who was dying. And this one I thought was really interesting because he was really big in the yoga world, like fairly well known, like that was like his thing, right down in California. And at the end of his life, Jesus started visiting him and he converted back to Christianity. But I mean, it was like really fascinating to hear the stories of like him being like, no, like Jesus is coming to see me, to talk to me, like he's visiting me. And there are so many stories of people saying that as they're reaching the end of life, loved ones will come. Jesus actually is fairly common. Angels will come. There's even been hospice nurses that have said they've seen entities visiting people on their deathbeds. So sure, maybe Jesus did show up for this guy and say to him whatever it was. But it was really interesting because some people were kind of upset with him about it. Like, and again, I don't understand this with humans where it's like, you believe this thing and you can't change your mind. Well, why not? Why can't he change his mind? Like, he's the one that's dying. He can change his mind all he wants to. But I thought that was really fascinating. And even for me with my grandmother, because I was with her so much. She was seeing dead loved ones, her old best friends, her siblings. Um, and again, I think it was angels. I don't know. She said there was women that were singing to her. I saw nothing. I heard nothing. I'm like looking over my shoulder, because it's like 2 o'clock in the morning. She's like, "You don't hear those women?" And I was like, "Nope, I do not." And some of it was not always like pleasant though, as much as like I hate to say that. Some of it I think was like her um processing again, maybe just like some like unfinished business where like she thought somebody that she used to know was coming there to kill her. And she was a little agitated about it. And she was like, "No, she's here and she wants to kill me." And I was like, "Grandma, she's not here. She's not coming to kill you, I promise." But then I have thought back afterwards about the situation. I was like, maybe there was some beef between the two of them that wasn't settled yet. And so she was just processing that. But in the long run, I really do believe that when we're nearing the end of life, we almost have like one foot in one world and one foot in the other. And so the lines get really blurred. And that, again, if there is something after this, even, science will say energy can't be destroyed, right? So if our soul, if that's what you want to call it, if whatever it is that makes me is just energy, when I die, if that can't be destroyed, who's to say that I can't also stay around here or go somewhere else? I mean, again, I don't know. People talk about going to like different planets when they die. Like, there's so many beliefs out there of like what happens to our souls in the space when we're not inhabiting a body. But so maybe these people really are kind of half here, half there. And so they are seeing things that are here all the time. We just don't see it. Maybe there are people in the room with me right now and I just don't see them. And that's okay. I don't want to see them either. I like not seeing that stuff right now, even though I have actually talked to people that are mediums and they'll say, like, no, I'll walk into my dining room sometimes and there'll be like a person standing there. And it takes me a minute to figure out, are they a human person or are they a spirit? Because they see them that clearly. And I'm like, yeah, no, I don't want that. So I don't know, but I love to think about it. It's all fascinating.
I love your curiosity about things and just kind of being open to all these possibilities. Um, as you were talking, it reminded me a little bit of like, when you're dreaming, right? Or like, when you're about to fall asleep and you're kind of like semi-awake, but kind of also in the dream state. And that reminds me a lot of what you're talking about of this, experience where some people have where they're kind of one foot in, one foot out. And maybe that dreamlike fantasy world, dreamlike world where it's like either it's going to be something pleasant, but there's also the possibility that it gets a little twisted and it might be a little bit rough or not so nice. Um, do you have any thoughts on that? Just kind of like, that dreamlike state, or, if that's what happens with most people, or is that something that only happens with some?
Well, that's one thing too that is interesting is that people that get visitations from loved ones, oftentimes it is at night. It is when they're half asleep. So maybe there is something that even when we're healthy and fully in this body, that when we start to go to sleep or we are asleep, that we're kind of, again, that like that line's blurred a little bit, because a lot of people do talk about getting visitations. I've heard of even people that'll say, I know that my loved one died before anybody told me because they visited me and I woke up and I was like, this can't be real. And then I found out the next day that they had died. And so that does seem to happen. And, this idea of that it's not always pleasant. I feel like, again, in the spirit world, in this world, there's not always good and bad. And in the long run, nothing is really fully good and nothing is really fully bad. It's just part of an experience. And so in the spirit world, maybe it's the same thing. And, as much as I don't want to say I don't want to believe, as much as I don't want to think that there's a possibility I could end up in a hell type state, I don't know, maybe there is. I mean, that's what karma is, right? They talk about karma, that if you do bad things, that eventually you're going to have to like pay for those bad things. Maybe there is something that it finds that balance, right? Within us, within the world, within all humans. I mean, I don't know, but I do think that we can experience more of the blurred lines in our daily life if we really wanted to, and that dream state is possibly part of it. I mean, I know I dreamed of my grandmother after she died, and it was very real. And when she left, I mean, she kind of said to me, like, I have to go though now. Like this was my one time to visit you. I have to go now. And I've never dreamt about her since. So maybe she did visit me in my dream because that was the place where I was able to allow it. Because again, if she were to like show up in my room, I might pass out. Like it might scare me enough that I would pass out. So I don't know, but I don't want that. So maybe she visited in a dream and then she was like, all right, but now it's time for me to go. I'm not sure, but it's people talk about what do they call it, like astral projection, which is kind of like when you go into that dream like state and you're able to move around. I mean, I don't know. Am I able to astral project? No. I kind of tried a little bit just because I was curious, but it's just, I think there's part of my mind that really does get in the way of all those things. But I grew up very Catholic. And so to me, again, like some of that thing of like spirits visiting me, it scares me. I'm like, I saw The Exorcist. I do not want to go there. So I think some of that is what stops me from having some of these experiences. But it's my mind stopping me. It's like my mind's put up that wall and it's like, nope, we're going to keep you safe by not letting these things in.
So how do you help people? Like, I'm sure people are, like you said, they're afraid, right? Like you come across people that know that they're going to pass and they're afraid. And part of what you said earlier was like, I try to help
It's a
people
little
make
bit
peace with things.
choppy, Regina.
Oh,
Sorry.
sorry.
Yeah, it's all right. You broke up there, so I didn't actually hear what you were saying.
Okay. Hopefully it clears up. So I'm wondering how you help people with that end of life where they are maybe finding themselves full of regrets or things that they want to make peace with. And so how do you coach people through that? Like, how do you help them come to terms or find at least as much peace towards the end of life?
There is a lot of people that do have regrets and they have shame about things that they've done. And I've found that the best thing to do is I ask questions, how are you feeling right now? And it's not so much, and I'll say, not physically, but like mentally, emotionally, like, how are you feeling? What are you feeling right now? And then they'll, like, for an example, I was talking with somebody the other day, and she didn't want to die. She didn't want to live the way that she was living anymore, but she didn't want to die. And so I said, well, why not? What are you most worried about? And she was really worried that her family would fall apart after she died, that she was like the glue that was holding her children and her husband together. And she was really worried that when she died, that was all going to end. And so I just allowed her to voice her fears and then just kept asking a few questions along the way. But I find that once you open that floodgate a little bit, I sat with a woman once for like 3 hours and I maybe said 5 words the entire time. And by the time I left the room, she was like, that was the best conversation. You were so wise. And I was like, I didn't say anything. Like, I really didn't. But sometimes it's just giving people that space because often when they want to talk about their fears, their regrets, I've sat with people that have told me that they've killed people. And a lot of people would go into a place of judgment, or they wouldn't want to hear about it because it makes them feel uncomfortable. And I just sat and I just listened, and it was not a nice story, but I was able to give them that space to vocalize it and then to be like, it's okay, like it's okay. Let's let it go. Like you don't have to hold that anymore. And it does take almost like I have to bite my tongue sometimes because we want to constantly fill silence. We want to respond to things that people are saying when a lot of times, if especially when it's like the regrets and the shame and the things that they've done, they just need to be able to get it out and to have somebody sit and listen and hold their hand. I mean, I've held people's hands for a long time. Like I just sat there and like held their hand while they talked. Sometimes even, like I'll gently like touch their hair a little bit, like very gently, like stroking their hair, because they just need that connection. They need to feel like somebody's listening without that judgment and supporting them. And again, especially at that point, like the person that said they killed somebody. I mean, I'm certainly not worried you're going to do it to me. Like at that point, you can't do anything. But I can see how other people would have been really uncomfortable with that conversation, where I was just like, look, man, I don't agree with it. I'm not saying that it's, something that I think we should go out and do, but at the same time, they were dying and they just needed somebody to hear the thing that they regretted the most. And so that was me. And I just sat and I just listened and told them it was okay. And, that's what I think a lot of people just really need, is that compassionate, non-judgmental space to vocalize without feeling more guilt and shame from the person that's listening.
I can imagine it must be so healing too for the person that can talk and like explain their life and what happened to them to another person that can just receive and receive. Um, and yeah, very wonderful of you to do that. Um, I have a question about when you started working, do you feel like it was like a natural transition, or do you feel like you had to kind of developed a little bit while you were going or doing it?
It was both, actually. I think I've been doing this work a really long time. Even when I was a child, my grandmother, the one that I talked about earlier, we used to go to a local veterans home where like the American vets would go when they were nearing the end of life. And it was right down the street from her house. So we used to go all the time to visit people, and we would take them to mass. Again, very Catholic. We'd bring rosary beads, we'd take them to mass, we'd like go through the whole thing. And even I did that when I was like a little kid, all the way through high school until I went away to college. I would always go with her. And I remember her telling me once when I was in high school that even when I was really little, I would go into the rooms that like other people avoided because the person was like that sick, or they were like nearing the end of life and it maybe smelled bad, or there was like weird noises. And she was like, and you would just like go right in and you would go up to the people. I don't really remember it. I mean, I remember doing it as I got older, but it just, I don't know, it didn't seem scary to me. It didn't seem off-putting. It just seemed like they needed somebody. So I think I naturally had this like desire to do this work, to hold this space. But then as I started going and doing this work professionally, again, there was a lot of the imposter syndrome. There was a lot of the fear that I was going to do something wrong, that maybe I was going to like hurt somebody or make the situation worse or say the wrong thing. And like, so I definitely had to learn. I ended up volunteering at a hospital that it's like over an hour away from me, but it was the only hospital that would take death doulas. And so I ended up working with a palliative care team there, which palliative care really works closely with people that are very ill. Even if they're not dying, it's like really working through illnesses and helping them be comfortable and get the care that they need. And there was a social worker there that she trained to be a death doula, which is how I got in there, because she became a death doula. She wanted more death doulas. So I worked under her for a while, which was very helpful, because then I was able to really see, by going into the rooms with her, what was appropriate, what was not appropriate. And with time, I've gotten more comfortable, but I'm still nervous. Every time I go into a room, I'm still nervous. I'm like, what if I don't know what to do? But then I have my mentor that trained me to be a death doula. The first time I sat with somebody that when they're very close to death, often they're unconscious. Their mouth might be open, they're breathing a lot through their mouth dries out a lot. Their lips will dry, their gums will dry out, their tongue will dry out. And so there's these little sponges on a stick that hospice will use, and they'll put some water on the sponge because they can't drink. They'll put some water on a sponge, and like you kind of run it around their lips and you put it inside their mouth just to keep it moist. I was so afraid that I was going to put too much water in this guy's mouth and that he was going to aspirate. So my mentor is actually in California, my death doula mentor. Her name is Jill as well, which it's not really why I chose her, but that's part of why I started looking at her death doula account. I was like, oh, look, it's another Jill. And then I really liked all her stuff. And so I mentored with her. But so I was like texting with Jill, and I was like, I have to do this thing. I'm really afraid I'm going to kill him. She's like, you're going to be fine. It would be very hard to put too much water in his mouth. That's why it's a sponge. Only so much water can go in. You're doing great. Just keep doing what you're doing. And so I have people around me that I can reach out to now and ask questions of. So when I do get a little bit afraid of, like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I found that the best thing to do is, again, depending on what state somebody's in, either way, showing up, being there, being willing to be a little bit uncomfortable, being willing to potentially just sit and do, like, quote unquote, nothing, right? Like if they're unconscious, I'm not talking to them. I'm not having a conversation. So then I had to figure out, okay, so what can I do? And then that's where some of like the shamanic healing kind of Reiki stuff comes in, where I will ask them. I know they can't physically answer me, but I'll say, is it okay if I give you some Reiki? Is it okay if I sit with you and, I'll kind of use some energy work to kind of help you feel more comfortable and take some of your fears and anxieties away. And if I feel any no, I'm like, all right, cool, we'll just sit here. But if I don't feel that feeling of like, no, I don't want that, then I'll sit and I'll hold their hand and I meditate and I, practice like my shamanic journeying, and I meet them where they're at, and I just transfer, right, some of their fears and anxieties, and I give them the love and healing energy. And I know, and like, healing energy is not going to heal them, keep them alive, but healing energy, and that, like, let's just bring you to a state of peace and a state of comfort and a state of not having fears and anxieties. And so that's what I'll tend to do if somebody's unconscious. But it's been a learning process for sure of like, what am I supposed to do in these different situations? And my biggest thing is I'd rather do less than overdo something and hurt somebody or cause them more fear or pain or anxiety. So again, if it's just sitting there and letting them talk to me, or just sitting there and holding their hand, that's fine. That's what I can do. And that must be what they need.
Can you speak a little bit more as to how you're using like things like Reiki and energy work and the shamanic healing with the work that you do?
Yeah, some clients, not even clients, again, more when I volunteer in the hospital. When I'm volunteering in the hospital, I meet with people that are at all stages of illness. Again, they might not be actually dying, but maybe they just got a terminal diagnosis. They're in the hospital because they were really sick and they didn't know why. So they went to the hospital, and then the hospital was like, by the way, like, you're full of cancer. We'll try some treatments, but you will die from this cancer. And so they're processing this information. And so I will sometimes, people at the hospital know that I do this. So sometimes I'll even have some of the nurses or the doctors say, oh, this person has mentioned they're really into yoga and like Reiki. So like maybe you want to go see them. Some people just like through conversation, I can tell that that might be something they're interested in. And I'll say like, you know, would you like me to do Reiki with you? I could do a guided meditation. You know, we can do a couple of these different things. And then usually I'll try as best as you can in a hospital. You can't get a whole lot of privacy. I try to close the door, dim the lights. I will put some music on my phone so that there's like some soft music. And then sometimes it'll be very traditional style Reiki where like I move around their body. Sometimes it's more of like a guided meditation, but I do it almost like shamanic journeying where I take them to a place that they find comfortable, a place that they find, um, you know, like their safe place, really, you know, and I'll say, like, visualize it, you know, like smell it, hear it, like really bring yourself there. And then, you know, at the end, and I'll usually say, and you can come back to this place at any time. You know, this is a place that whenever you need it, you can go there when you need to have some feelings of peace, when you're feeling overwhelmed by your stress and your anxiety. So I will just kind of see what people want, and just kind of go from there. But that's why now, like the way that I practice, you know, my Reiki and like my shamanic like healing stuff, I just kind of almost say it's like energy work because I just kind of blended a few different things together, but it just really depends on what the person needs. I kind of have a conversation with them and then just feel it out. Like, what does it seem like they need? Some people, they just, you know, want somebody again to like sit and like hold their hand. And while I'm doing that, it's, you know, kind of, there's a Buddhist meditation practice that I'd learned called Tonglen, and it translates into the practice of sending and taking. And in that, it's really like a meditation practice where you're taking in, really just like the negative stuff. Sometimes they'll tell you to visualize it as like a dark, sticky, kind of heavy energy. And you're taking that in, but you're not holding it. Because that was the big thing. I had to learn to like not hold everybody's stuff, because it's real easy to hold their stuff if you don't have your own practices. And so I practice like taking in the negativity and then just like sending out the love. And I feel like that's one that is pretty simple. It's not exactly Reiki, but again, it kind of, I feel like it's all the same thing, right? It's like a bunch of different words from different cultures that have like named them different things, but it's really all the same types of practices. So, you know, I will do it in person. Sometimes I've done it with clients, long distance. So I've done like, you know, if they're, again, if they're not well, if we're not local to each other, I'll do it kind of in my own space and we'll set up a time. So I'm like, all right, around 9 o'clock, you know, whatever your bedtime is, you're going to go to bed just like normal. Just, you know, I'll do the guided meditation a little bit with them first. Like, this is going to be your place. Imagine a place. This is where you're going to go. And then I'm going to meet you there. And then I sit here in this same room and I go into a meditative state and I bring myself to them. And again, I don't know, maybe that is astral projection. I don't know. Who knows? So again, I'm like weird where part of me is like terrified of like some of this stuff. And then the other part of me is like, no, I'm all about it. I love it. I think it's amazing. So I don't know. Again, I'm all over. I try to find the balance.
You're definitely not alone about that.
Yeah.
So, how did you like come across like the energy work or stumble through it?
I actually, so I'm like, long story, very short, right? As short as possible. And I will put a little bit of a trigger warning on here. It does involve sexual assault and trauma. So if anybody's not comfortable with that, you might want to pause for a few minutes. When I was in college, I had a boss that drugged me and raped me. And I went into serious depression over it. I partially, but like pretended that it didn't happen. Like, I mean, I was a hot mess, right? So I went away for my internship for college. So again, I was about 21, maybe 22 years old. I got into a fight at a bar. And I got fired from my job, fired from my internship, 15 weeks into an 18-week internship. I got fired and I had to start it all over. I almost got expelled from college. Like, it was a big thing. And I know now, again, with like years later, like, I mean, just within the last few years, I figured out that the week that I got into the fight was almost exactly a year after that had happened with him. And I couldn't fight him. So like part of me, I think, fought because I needed to get that energy out. But in the long run, that fight was possibly the best thing that happened to me, because first I fell into a deeper depression where like I couldn't even get out of bed. And when the universe wants you to find things, right, it kind of like drops the breadcrumbs. So I kept finding flyers for this yoga center that was like literally 2 blocks away from where I was living at the time. And then I would like find a flyer somewhere, and then I went to like get my car service. And at the time, like they had computers in there because people didn't have smartphones. And I went to use one of the computers and like their website was up. And I was like, why does this stupid yoga center keep like showing up? And finally, one day I was like, again, I couldn't get out of bed on my day off. And I was like, Jill, you need to get out of bed. Like, you can't do this. Like, I was borderline suicidal. Like, I was just a bad place for me. And I finally was like, you have to just clean your room, if nothing else. And I found a flyer that I'd picked up and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to call him. And so I called and the owner answered and he said, oh, you know, it's meditation tonight. You should come for our meditation session. And I was like, all right, sure, whatever. And so I show up and it's like just him and his wife. I've never meditated in my life. It was an hour-long meditation. I had to sit still for an hour. I thought I was going to lose my mind. By the time that I was done, though, I just felt so different. And he was like, why don't you come tomorrow for my yoga class? And I was like, all right, sure. And I never stopped going. And I ended up taking my yoga teacher training through him. I got my Reiki 1 and 2 at the same time from somebody else that was there. And if I wouldn't have gotten fired from that job, I would have never been able to take that training and get that Reiki initiation, because I would have gone back to school. Where instead, by the time my yoga teacher training was done, I graduated from that and I started back at school like a week later. So I had to drive from Florida up to New York because I went to college in New York and this all happened in Florida. So like the timing was perfect and it literally changed my life. Like at graduation, I sobbed. I cried so hard and I was like, you don't understand. Like, you saved my life. If I would not have found this, I would almost guarantee you I would not be alive today. And so like, I found that a long time ago. And it really has just been something that for most of my, time with my Reiki, I've just used it on myself more than other people, because I think I was like, I don't know, I was like, people are going to think it's weird. Like, I feel uncomfortable doing this. But I did a lot of practice on myself and then on some friends. But then I started using it a little bit more as I started getting into this work. And then I did a shamanic training about 2 years ago to kind of lean a little bit more into that. And again, a lot of it was like I was using it on myself. And then that's when I put together the fact that around the anniversary, we'll call it, of my boss, I would fight with people every year. Like, not just physically fight, but like the physical fight was the worst one. But like fights on the street. My husband was like, you're going to get yourself killed one day. Why are you arguing with these people? And I was like doing my shamanic training and I was seeing my therapist and she was like, well, what else happened around this weekend? Because I was like, I'm starting to realize it's like a pattern. And then I was like, oh, that thing with my boss happened. And she was like, Jill, hello. It took you this long to figure it out. And so during my shamanic training, all of this was happening as well. And so my teacher helped me create my own ceremony to like really release like all that I was holding on to, because I was like, I can't keep doing this every year. Like, I can't. And so we did this kind of creation together. I did it by myself here. And it really was able to allow me that this year, when the anniversary came, I didn't even notice. I kind of like went through it and then I was like, oh, wait. I was like, I went right by it and didn't even notice. So like, look at me. But again, I'm 45 now, and this happened when I was 21. So it's taken me a really long time to like heal all of that. But again, I'm glad I'm not taking that to my grave. I'm glad I'm not holding that anger and energy and all of that for the rest of my life, because it was not doing me any good. And I still hope he's dead, but that's a whole different thing.
Thank you so much for sharing that. You never know who you're going to help, who's going to listen and be like, oh, like I can heal myself. I can heal from this. And
Yeah.
I don't need
Oh,
to
for
hold on to
sure.
it. Yeah. So do you think that um, you would do anything differently? Any regrets or anything that you would do differently looking back?
With like my life in general, or
Yeah, I guess that's a big question.
yeah, no, it's actually it's a big question, but there's a simple answer for it. um yes, there are for sure things that I would go back and do different, especially I think for me when it comes to being a mother. Becoming a mother was hard for me in some ways. I was a little bit older. I was in my 30s. I had to really shift gears of being like, I've always been very independent. Like, I don't have my husband's last name. Like, I was one of those women where I was like, nope, it's me and it's going to be me. And so, becoming a mom, I didn't realize, first off, how much it changes who you are, right? And that you really need to properly grieve when there's changes in your life, even positive changes. There's still a closing that's happening in order for this new beginning. And so I look back, they're 10 and 13 now. I look back and I wish that I was more present for some of the even more difficult times when they were younger, because I know that at that point, my coping mechanisms were to like retreat into myself, retreat by myself. I would go up into my room just to like be alone. And I can't get that time back, right? And so there's part of me that I'm like, I really wish that I would have known then what I know now. But the good thing is that becoming a death doula has given me a lot of really positive things, in that I am more present now with my family. I'm more patient now with my family. I'm more grateful for every moment that I have with them. And I know that it's partially because I've talked to women whose children have died, and that when my children are being a pain, because that's what people do, right? Children, your spouses, right? Everybody's a pain sometimes. But when my children are being a pain, I'm thinking there's a mom somewhere that wishes their child was refusing to brush their teeth or refusing to do the things that used to make me really frustrated. And now I'm like, no, but I'm still here with them. I even do this like little practice sometimes where I'll think to myself, okay, what if you were dead and you were a ghost and you were observing this situation from the outside? And then God came down and gave you 10 minutes and said, for 10 minutes, you can be there. You can do whatever you want. What would you be doing? And it's not doing the things that I often would be doing, which is being on my phone or being annoyed with my kids because things are messy, or whatever used to really get me stressed out and anxious and short tempered and like just not being the mom that I wanted to be. Now I'm like, no, I would be sitting, I'd be talking to them, I'd be touching their hair, I would be like really engaged with them and what was happening. And I know that one day I'm not going to be here. Hopefully, I'm going to be old and they're going to be old and grown up. But either way, one day they're going to be out of my house. One day, like, we're not going to be here together. So, why are we wasting so much time doing some of the things that we're doing when I have the opportunity now to be there? And then even like my husband, I'm like, where is he at now? He's in Portland. He's literally all the way across the country, right? He flew there yesterday. Before he was leaving, he was annoying me about something, and like we were good doing the like nah, 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 with each other. But before he left, I was like, I love you so much. I'm gonna miss you. I hope you have a great trip. I took the time to connect and give him a nice hug and tell him how much I love him, because somebody's husband's not going to come home tonight. And it might be mine, like there's nothing special about me that's going to prevent that from happening to me. And so I don't ever want him or I to think the last time we saw each other, we were annoyed with each other over like something stupid. It's usually something stupid, but we're still human. It doesn't mean that I still don't get annoyed sometimes about things and I still don't react the same way. But I know now that I do my best to just try to be as present as I can be, because so many people, when I talk to them, the thing that they want the most when they're nearing the end of life is more time with their family. Like the woman that I saw the other day at the hospital, I was like, what is it that you really want right now? Like, what would bring you some comfort? And she was like, I just want to have dinner with my family. I just want my kids and my grandkids and my husband to like have dinner with me. And we're kind of past that point, but I was also like, we're going to talk to the hospital. We're going to try to make this happen for you. Like, we're going to sneak them in if we have to. But that's the things that people think about at the end of life. And so that is where some of my regrets are and some of my shame is. And there's still nights when I wake up in the middle of the night and I think to myself like, oh, I really didn't connect with my kids as much as I wanted to. And then my brain starts going back to like, I should have snuggled them more when they were little. And like, okay, Jill, just like bring yourself back to the present. Let that go a little bit. But I don't want to look back when I'm on my deathbed and think I put all these other things as more important than the things that actually mean a lot to me. And a lot of that is because I've talked to so many people that are dying, and I'm not afraid to hear the things that they're saying they regret and hear their shames and hear all these things. I just take it in and I go, okay, yeah, but I also don't want that to be me. So I'm going to try my hardest.
Wow, that is very powerful. Like exercise.
And
And that
it's
gives
amazing. It really does work. If you do that throughout your day, every once in a while, just like stop and think to yourself, like, if I was a ghost and I had 10 minutes, would I be doing what I'm doing right now? And sometimes the answer is yes. But a lot of times the answer is no. I'm like scrolling on my phone, something mindless, I'm like getting annoyed about something somebody posted on Facebook. Like, worried about something that probably is not even going to happen anyway. Like, it really does bring me back to the present moment and be like, no, I would not be doing this right now. So let me do whatever that is that I wished I was doing. It really does help.
That's wonderful. Is there any misconceptions when it comes to the death doulas?
I think it's mainly misconceptions in that people just don't know what we do. I've been networking in person with people now for 4 years, and I still go to some of these networking meetings and people are like, I don't know who to send to you. Like, I'm not sure. And I'm like, anybody can come to me, right? Anybody that you're working with, especially the people that I'm networking with, are talking to, I'm talking to elder care lawyers. I'm talking to people that work in hospices, people that work in assisted livings. I'm like, literally anybody that you work with could benefit from using a death doula. But again, all of us could benefit from thinking about our fears and anxieties, talking about what's important to us at the end of life. Because what's important to me at 45 is going to be different than what's important to me at 85. And so I think the biggest misconception is that we're only for the end of life. Some people say, well, when do I call you? When my person's dying? I'm like, well, I mean, yeah, sure, you can call me then, but it's really better if you call me earlier and I get to know the person. I get to have some conversations. I do a whole plan with people where we write down everything from like medical treatments. Like, would you want to be intubated? Would you want to have chest compressions? This is what happens when you get chest compressions. Is that something you still might want? Or maybe you don't want it. up to like, do you want music in your room? Do you want flowers? Do you want maybe some like essential oils? Would you want gentle massage? Like, what is it that you would want? Well, if I know these things ahead of time, then I can make sure that it happens, which is why doula is a good term because, birth doula, they're not just going to show up when you're having the baby. Like they need to show up earlier. They need to come up with these plans with the person before they're having the baby. And so really, death doulas are not just the end of life, like the last couple days, last couple hours. Like really, our work starts earlier, and our work can start at any time. I mean, I do actually work with people just to work with some of their fears and anxieties, and like, let's do some guided meditations. Let's do some of these things to help you release your fear and anxiety and live more present. Like the benefits that I got from death doula training, you can still get those without becoming a death doula. Like I can walk you through those. So anybody can use a death doula, not just if you're dying.
Are there any practices that you engage in just to kind of unwind when you've had maybe a particularly challenging situation happen or just like in general?
I really need my movement practices. In the mornings, I do start my day with, again, I did my yoga training. It's kind of yoga, but now it's a little bit more, I don't know, I brought a couple different things in. So I need to really start my day with some movement kind of to prepare myself for going in. Um, if it's like a death that maybe if I was with somebody and I have sat with people that were a little bit younger, where then it is a little triggering when I'm like, they're younger than me and they're dying. Um, After those days, I will make sure that I take like a longer shower and really just kind of imagine washing all this stuff away. I do like to meditate. I will sit and just kind of like silence all the noise a little bit. And just really kind of listen to my body. I listen to my body and my heart and my mind a little bit more than I ever used to. And my mind being not the chitter chatter mind, the one that just like rambles about nonsense, more like, okay, maybe today you do need to go for a walk. Maybe today you do need to eat that chocolate bar, like whatever it is, where there's that part of my head that's like, no, don't eat the chocolate, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, no, I think today that might actually make me feel a little bit better. So I'm going to eat the chocolate bar because again, I might die tomorrow. So if I want that chocolate bar today, I'm going to eat it today.
Where can people find you?
So I am on all social medias, and my website is the same as my business name, End of Life Clarity. So I do have, the TikToks and Instagram and all that stuff. I did recently start adding my podcast to YouTube. So my podcast videos now can be seen on YouTube. I actually came up with now a new line of t-shirts, which actually I have one on now. It says "How We Die Matters." And again, it doesn't have to be morbid. He's like, look how cute he is, the little Grim Reaper there. Because I want to encourage people to wear death positive type of clothing, partially because that inspires people to have conversations with you. When somebody sees this shirt, and they're like, what does that mean? How we die matters. And I'm like, oh, of course it matters. And then I have really great conversations with people. So when you wear things like this into your community, you really help start these death positive conversations. So again, you can find me at End of Life Clarity all over the place. The podcast is Seeing Death Clearly, just because it's kind of a fun play on the name, but you can find the podcast even on my website as well.
I was going to ask about that shirt because I noticed the top and I was like, oh, that's
Yeah.
really cute.
Yeah, I started designing shirts. Just it's funny because it goes back to like my pastry chef days of I design my shirts like I would design a cake. Like I kind of imagine it as like a cake and I put elements the way that I would design a cake. So I'm like, see, I'm still using my pastry chef background.
Awesome. Well, we want to thank you so much for being here and for spending this time talking to us about death. It's a very important subject and just about the work you do.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Because as you can see, I get real excited when I talk about it.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. That was wonderful.